I went into this movie almost completely blind. All I knew was podcast and zombie apocalypse. And the result was I ended up enjoying this quite a bit. I did not expect it. I figured I would like it based on the trailer that I did watch before I saw it, because that's what made me put my request for the screener in. But I didn't expect for it to be as engaging as it was for me. The movie I'm talking about is called Didn't Die, and it was released theatrically here on March 6th. It premiered at Sundance last year. I don't think it's playing in my area, so I'm guessing the theatrical release is probably pretty limited. It's supposed to be coming to on-demand release April 28th, so a little bit more than a month away. The basic premise of this story is that it is set in a near-future zombie apocalypse. It's been happening for a bit, but generally the zombies were only active at night, so during the daytime you were safe. However, the zombies are evolving now, and what they call the biters that are not supposed to be active during the day are now becoming active during the day. And the stakes increase for the people in this story when the main character's ex-boyfriend shows up with an orphaned baby whose parents had been killed in an earlier attack, which you see in the prologue. I did not know the thing about the orphaned baby. Now, I did watch the I watched portions of the trailer, so I didn't get far enough into the trailer if it shows the baby to realize that that was going to be the situation of the story. And when that happened, that's kind of when the story took a turn for me from being something that was just like, oh, okay, these people, zombie apocalypse, and she's got a podcast. And then the situation with the baby happened, and I was like, oh, this is now suddenly so much more interesting. The general tone of this film is that it is a character-driven horror comedy. There's not tons of comedy in here because it is a pretty serious story, actually. But the comedy that happens is just like in these little moments of the character interactions. Like there is a scene where she is very angry at her ex-boyfriend and she comes running after him and he's trying to run away. And I'm not going to tell you the situation that was involved in that, but when it was happening, I actually laughed. It's not played for comedy, but it was comedic to me. The situation was comedic given the circumstances of the story and why she was angry with him, and justifiably so. The story itself is not action-packed, so don't go in here expecting that. There are, of course, zombie attacks and moments like that, but the focus of this story is really more on relationships and survival dynamics and human behavior in crisis. I liked also the unique angle of the podcast. She has created this podcast for people who are still tuned in to whatever extent they can be and listening to the radio. I mean, well, the main radio stations, they're not really working, but she's got this podcast that's up. I actually thought the actress who played in here is the main character, and her name was Vanita. The main character's name is Vanita. I thought she had a fantastic podcast voice. As someone who works in audiobooks, I really pay attention to how a person's voice sounds. My misophonia probably doesn't help sometimes because I can get a little bit critical and annoyed with certain voices that just kind of, I don't know, rub me wrong, but hers was just wonderful. I loved when it would show her recording her podcast, and I was like, wow, she really has a fantastic voice. There was also kind of a funny little moment that happens when she and her ex-boyfriend are recording an episode together or whatever, and when he puts on the headphones, I think he puts on the headphones and he starts talking in the microphone, and he makes a comment about his mouth being very wet. And I knew exactly what he was referring to because it's something that's very relatable if you work in audio. It's something that I never fully realized myself until I started getting into audiobook narration several years ago. I don't really actively narrate anymore, but I noticed your mouth makes so much noise. Not everybody has this. There are some narrators that their voice sounds very clean and it's not sticky. And then there's others that just, it is, and there's not much they can do about it. Technique helps and stuff like that. But I just thought that was a funny moment, because I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I looked up more information about this film after I saw it. I had received the press kit when I put in a request for the screener. And so before I started filming the review, I was looking up some stuff about the filmmakers, because I was interested after having seen it, and after being as impressed as I was for the simple little movie that this is. This is very low budget, you guys. If the number that I saw is accurate, I think maybe they spent, I don't know, a few tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, I don't even think it was $100,000 that they spent on this thing. You can tell it's a low budget film, but it's not overly distracting, because I thought for the most part it was done very well. It was directed by someone named Meera Menon. She has directed episodes of shows that we're all familiar with: The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, Miss Marvel, and Westworld. And there's some interesting behind the scenes information about this that really hit me when I read it. She apparently lost her home in the Altadena fires from not too long ago. And so knowing this, and knowing that some of the scenes in this movie were filmed at that house and now it's gone, it makes the movie more meaningful through that lens, through that knowledge of what happened. And this ties in with something that I was going to mention about the visual style of the film, is that it was shot primarily in black and white. And at first I was wondering why. Is this because of Night of the Living Dead? And yes, that was actually part of the reason. Now, there is a later portion of the film that is shot in color, and that's kind of like a clear distinction between past and present. And there were other technical reasons for why they chose black and white. It had something to do with an RED monochrome camera, or red. I don't know if they call it RED or just red. I have no idea. But she said that after they filmed it this way, she wasn't entirely sure if the black and white was going to work. But when the stuff happened with her house, she felt that the decision to film it this way was perfect, because the black and white, especially the fact that there are moments in the movie that take place in her house that is supposed to be flashback sort of scenes, she views that as like, that's something that's frozen in time, that's in the past, that was the black and white, and then the present is a more vivid shift to color. So I thought that was interesting to find this out. I did write down in my notes, and I kind of still feel the same way, that I'm not sure the black and whiteness of this fully elevated the film, but it didn't degrade it. The intention is clear and meaningful. It did not detract from the story. I'm just not sure that it elevated it or made it have any more oomph than it already did, if that makes any sense. The characters in here, they were played by actors that I don't recognize, or if I've seen them before, it's just maybe they've been a side character or it's been in passing, and they never really stuck with me, so I didn't recognize anybody in here. But Vanita was played by an actress, I think maybe she's a comedian too, and her name is Kiran. Deol. I thought she did a really good job. She had a strong presence in the film, especially vocally. Great podcast voice, again. And her ex-boyfriend, Vincent, was played by George Basil. His character is funny because he has this background as a serial cheater. The way he is kind of adds unpredictability and some humor to certain situations, like the moment I was referring to earlier when I said she was angry at him and she was running after him. You'll know what I mean when you see it, if you watch it. The baby element to the story, I thought, raised the stakes emotionally. And a fun fact about the baby is that it's the director's daughter, which I thought was that was cool. There were multiple things that worked for this film. The character dynamics, I thought, carry the story. And the unique angle of her keeping this podcast going during the zombie apocalypse, I really appreciated that. It's got a pretty lean runtime. It's only about 93 minutes long, obviously counting credits, so it doesn't really drag. For me, it didn't anyway. However, since it's not super high octane, action-packed, maybe some of you will disagree, but for me, it actually really didn't. I liked all the little quiet moments that they had in here. It was much more engaging than I expected early on. And knowing about the emotional undercurrent that's kind of tied to the real life tragedy of what happened to the director's house, that gives it more depth. Knowing that now, I mean, I enjoyed it already, but knowing this background, this behind the scenes stuff helps me appreciate it a little bit more. Having said this, the film is not perfect. There aren't enough cons that really bring this down to any sort of rotten territory, nowhere close. But there are some issues. I mentioned the low budget limitations. They're obvious, but it is shot pretty well and acted pretty well. So it wasn't something that really overwhelmed the experience. You did notice it more in things like when the zombies would attack, and the editing during some of those times felt a bit clunky. Maybe that was also just to kind of cover up the low budget nature of what was being filmed. But there were other things or two moments that stood out to me as things that were some issues, one probably more than another. The first thing I'm going to mention, probably more than the second, was there is a moment where the characters leave their door open at night. Obviously, it had to happen for a particular moment to occur after, but that felt like a very weak point to transition us from this part to this part. Why would they leave the door open at night? They live in a zombie apocalypse. They know zombies are active at night. Why the hell would they not always be closing the doors? They did mention something about, how it's easy to be careless, but you would think at night, especially when you're going to sleep, you would make sure all the damn doors are locked. That didn't sit well for me. That's probably the biggest issue I had with this film. Another one was there's a moment where a character is bitten and you realize it later, obviously. They never show it. You never really see a moment where this bite happens. I don't know if that was just an editing thing or if that was intentionally done to make you not realize that this had occurred. It's probably the latter. However, it was a little agitating to realize that this had happened. I would like to have seen when this actually occurred, especially because we were seeing all these other moments. We were seeing all the moments of fighting and killing zombies, and for some reason we just never saw when this fight happened. And I don't know, if that's the worst I can say. It's not the worst I can say about the film, but that's minor, really. This film's strong character focus and dynamics, they outweigh any of the flaws that I mentioned here. I think it's got a certain charm to it, knowing that it's an indie film, knowing now what happened to the filmmakers, the people involved. It's got an emotional context that elevates it. And I thought it was a solid indie horror comedy. If you like zombies, I think you'll be interested. I like to watch zombie movies. I'm not super huge into zombies, but the premise of this being a podcaster in the midst of a zombie apocalypse was something that intrigued me. So that was why I was interested. But if you are specifically drawn to zombie stories, or if you like indie horror, I do think this is worth checking out. And I enjoyed it enough that I wanted to talk about it a little bit with you guys. So that's all I have to say for now about Didn't Die. If you guys check it out, let me know what you think. All right, that's it for this one. Bye.